Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast. My name is JT Olson, flying solo tonight. Garrett Ballard, my co host, will be joining me again next week. Until then, show must go on. And it's been a couple of weeks since we've been on the air. Holiday season. My son had a birthday a few weeks ago. Keeping pretty busy has kept me from able to record the way I want to. So I wanted to get back in the flow of it tonight, even without Garrett. And I don't want to get too hung up on last week's game against the 49ers. It's a game that I think everyone expected the Bucs to lose. It's not only what I consider the best team in the NFC in San Francisco, but it's really a horrible matchup for the Bucs. I don't think you'll find a worse matchup amongst NFC playoff caliber teams. I think they match up better against the Eagles. I think they match up better against the Lions. I think that's just a terrible combination of it's a more talented team and it's a bad matchup, and it equals an ugly loss for the Bucs. Don't want to get too hung up on whose fault it is. Todd Bowles, Dave Canales, whatever. It's just that's a game 9 times out of 10 you're not going to win. And I don't think that's the case against a team like Detroit or a team like Philadelphia. I think you can play with those teams. But the 49ers, I think, are the worst case scenario for the Bucs. So I'm not surprised they lost. I'm not surprised they lost by double digits. It's not something I'm honestly all that concerned about because you don't really have to worry about San Francisco unless you're in the playoffs. And one, I don't view the Bucs as a Super Bowl contending team. So even if they face them in the playoffs, it is what it is. And 2, it's done. It's over. That's gone. You fall down to 4-6. You're in 3rd place for the division. And honestly, that's okay. It feels weird to say, but the Buccaneers are still right in the driver's seat at 4-6 and 3rd place in the division. It's not something most 4-6 teams could say, but it's the truth for the Bucs. Because they are currently tied with the Falcons at 4-6. Falcons have the tiebreaker from the head-to-head win. And they are 1 game behind the Saints, who the Bucs have the tiebreaker over. And luckily enough, those 2 teams will play each other next game they play. So as long as the Bucs take care of their business, they're right there. Either 1 game behind the Saints or really a tiebreaker behind the Falcons. And they still have a game to play against both of those teams. So Bucs go out, you take care of your business, you beat the Colts, you win your division games. You got 2 games versus the Panthers, a game versus the Saints, a game versus the Falcons. You win those games, those 5 games, brings you up to 9 wins. That's probably a playoff team, even if you don't win the division. And I think that would be good enough to win the division. And you still have 2 other additional games on top of that against the Packers and against the Jaguars. Both are very winnable. So, again, as weird as it is to say, the Bucs are in the driver's seat. The Bucs control their own destiny. And that starts with this game against the Colts. And the Bucs aren't favored in this game. They are 2.5-point underdogs playing in Indianapolis. So home team usually gets a 3-point bump. So Las Vegas sees these 2 teams as pretty equal, maybe Bucs a little bit better. And honestly, this is a game the Bucs should win. It's not just a game the Bucs have to win. It's a game the Bucs should win because I think they're a far more talented team. I mean, we've talked about it a lot this year. Bucs are an incredibly talented team. The likes of Vita Vea, the likes of Shaq Barrett, Levante David, Antoine Winfield, Carlton Davis, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Tristan Wirfs. The Bucs are loaded with talent. Their issues have come more from coaching than anything this year. And it's not to say that they are this incredibly talent-rich team where they should be a contender, but they're not. But they should be above 500. They should be leading their division. But really, they've given away 2 or 3 games that I think they could have and should have won. That can't be the case this weekend. This is a Colts team who I think is less talented, who has a first-year head coach with Shane Steichen, who I like. I think he's going to be a very promising head coach, but it is his first year. They're putting a lot of things in place. The Colts are a team with a journeyman quarterback, similar to the Bucs, but I think there's a pretty wide talent gap there between Baker Mayfield, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but I think he's having a really solid year, and who the Colts are rolling out in Gardner Minshew. Anthony Richardson, their first-round pick, he's out. He's injured. Gardner Minshew is not meant to be the guy in Indy. He is a backup. He is limited. He's kind of a game manager, almost kind of like a Ryan Fitzpatrick type. He can air it out, but it's probably not a good thing if he does. He's limited with his physical tools. So this is a game where the Bucs should have a coaching advantage and should have a quarterback advantage. And those have been the big question marks with the Bucs this year. Everything else, wide receiver, defense, those are talent advantages for the Bucs in most games. Even offensive line, I think, has played better than a lot of people expected to coming into the year. Now you talk about Tristan Wirfs, one of the best tackles in the NFL. You talk about Luke Gedeke, who has been a breath of fresh air at right tackle this year, having a great bounce-back season. Even guys like Cody Mock, second-round pick, I think he's played better than we expected. So, offensive line should be good. I mean, really across the board, this should be an advantage for the Bucs. Honestly, I don't think very highly of this Colts team. This is a team that is 5-5 by record, but I think is probably one of the worst 8 to 10 teams in the NFL. And they do have a few pieces. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, one of the better running backs in the NFL. Quentin Nelson, a guard prospect who I was really, really high on coming out of the draft, and he's been one of the best guards in the NFL since day one. Bernhard Raymond, second-year left tackle. He's having a really nice season. Similar to Luke Gedeke, who came from the same college. A little rocky his rookie year, but has really kind of found his footing in his second year. Ryan Kelly, I think, is one of the more underrated centers in the league. He's someone who's going to be out this game. So that's the strength, I think, of the Colts offense, is that running game and that offensive line. And they're missing one of their key pieces. This is a game where the Bucs' defensive line really has to kind of have their way with things. Vita Vea, going against a backup center, has to dominate. And that's kind of the expectation for V every week. He's 6'4", 340 plus, athletic. He's just one of the best defensive tackles in the game. And week in and week out, he does things that no one else in the league can do. And I expect him to do that again this week. And the Bucs need him to do that this week. He's the basis of their defense. He's the foundation. Their run defense, the things they can do with their pass defense in terms of blitzes, the way they use Kalijah Kancey, it's all built off what V can do in the middle. So This is a game I expect him to once again dominate. Mention Kalijah Cansey. I never really want to see him one-on-one with Quentin Nelson. But I do want to see him all over this defensive line. Lining up at D-end, lining up at D-tackle, stunting, twisting. His athletic ability is rare. And he has been disruptive. He is one of the rookie leaders for tackle with a loss, and he's only played half the season compared to everyone else. Kalijah Cansey is going to be really good. And I'd love to see that really kind of continue this week against what is a good offensive line. There's been a lot of conversation lately with the edges in this team. Shaq Barrett, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the emergence of Yaya Diaby, and how to kind of divvy those reps up. And I am still a believer in Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. I think a lot of what he does isn't always recognized in the box score. He is a good pass defender. He's good in coverage for an edge, which Todd Bowles likes to drop those guys into coverage. He's an improving run defender. I think he's gotten better and better each year in that aspect of his game. And he's a guy who generates pressure. And pressure isn't always as easy to identify as sacks because it doesn't show up in the box score. But Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is a really solid second pass rusher. And maybe people want him to be more than that because he was a first-round pick. And he has the athletic ability to be more than that. But do I want to see Joe Tryon-Shoyinka on the field less? Not really, no. Do I want to see Yaya Diaby on the field more? Yeah. I think he's starting to emerge. He's a big physical edge rusher. He's explosive. He's a guy who reminded me a lot of Terrell Suggs coming out of college. One of the Baltimore Ravens greats. A guy who is physical, a guy who is nasty in the way he plays. I really think there are a lot of similarities between those two. So I want to see him on the field more, but I don't want to take Joe Tryon-Shoyinka off the field. And you don't really want to take Shaq off the field, but moving forward, he's kind of the odd man out. Will he be on this team after this year? I don't know the answer to that. I would think no. Maybe next year is his last year, but he is not a long-term piece on this team. He's in his early 30s. He's coming off a major injury. He hasn't been as good this year as he has in years past. Maybe taking a little off his plate is the answer. I don't know. Really, you want all three of those guys on the field. And then there's guys, Anthony Nelson, Marquise Watts. By all accounts, he's really emerging in practice. And from the very, very limited we've seen from him in the last 2 weeks, he's been effective. So the Bucs have so much depth at edge rusher. It's a really great problem to have, even though they don't have an elite guy. They don't have that top-tier guy. And as much as I like Yaya and the athletic ability he has, I don't see him as that guy moving forward. But I'd like to see if he can be. I'd like to see him get more opportunity. Really, those top three guys, I'd kind of like to see them all get equal reps. Shaq, JTS, and Yaya. Give them all 70% reps. Divvy up the rest to Nelson. Divvy up to Watts. And see what you got. Really make this a true rotation. Bring in fresh bodies. It's a good problem to have. It really is. And I don't know that any of these guys are really going to flash against this Colts offensive line, again, who I think is good. Bernard Raymond, second-year left tackle. Braden Smith, their right tackle. That's a solid group of pass blockers right there. But this is a solid group of edge rushers. Get a win or two, get a sack or two, generate some pressure. You don't have to be dominant to be disruptive. So, JTS wins a rep here. Yaya wins a rep there. Shaq wins a rep here. That all adds together for disruption. And against a guy like Gardner Minshew, that can be a huge difference in the game. So really across the board, this entire Bucs defensive line, even though I like what the Colts have up front, I think it's a big advantage for the Bucs. Other than that, I mean, there's not a lot on this Colts offense that scares me. You take care of your battle in the trenches. You limit Jonathan Taylor. I mean, Michael Pittman, he is their number one wide receiver. I think on most good teams, he's number two. And he's solid. He's a big body, can go up and get the ball, but he's not dynamic. He's not a guy who I don't think the Bucs can't handle man on man. You put Carlton Davis on him, and you kind of call it a day. That's a guy that Carlson can erase. And I know Davis is injured right now. I know he's banged up. I know he's questionable to play. If Davis doesn't play, we already know Dean's not going to play. Then this group of wide receivers becomes a little bit concerning. I mean, just because of who's covering them. But Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce is solid. Josh Downs is the guy who I think could be a problem in this game because he's shifty, he's quick. But none of those guys are a guy I look at and think, wow, this is a problem. This is a mismatch. You know, there's no Jalen Waddle on this team. There's no Devontae Smith on this team. I mean, it's just not a overly talented group of wide receivers. They're solid. You know, there's not a guy I look at in this top three, Pierce, Pittman, and Downs, who I think, man, that guy's a bum. Man, that's a obvious advantage for whoever they're playing against. No, they're solid across the board. I like all of those guys as a 2 or a 3 on most teams. But if you got Carlton Davis in there, I feel good about that matchup. Zion McCollum on the other side, I feel okay about that matchup. Zion's been a little up and down. He's been better this year than last year. I don't think any of these guys are going to kill the Bucs defense. Then on the other side of the ball, Colts defense. This is a game where they are going to be missing one of their best defensive tackles in Grover Stewart. He is very disruptive, but he's suspended right now. He's out. So that leaves them with DeForest Buckner, who, again, very disruptive, very good. He's a matchup problem for the entire interior of the Bucs' offensive line. After that, it gets thin. It really does. Kwity Paye was a first-round pick in 2021. He's quick, he's fast, he's bendy. I don't think he's anything that Luke Gedeke can't handle on his own, let alone Tristan Wirfs. I mean, there's just not a lot of guys who are a problem after their top 2 defensive tackles in Stewart and Buckner. And Stewart's out. So really, you just really key in on DeForest Buckner. You double team him. You know, you chip him with a guard. You chip him with a center. Let the other guys take care of him. It's a situation where you just can't be beat by one guy. So really key in on one guy. Don't let him beat you. There's no one else who is much of an issue here. This is a game, again, the Bucs should win. I think they should win comfortably. They should win by multiple scores. Will they? I think so. Even banged up. No Dean, no Levante David, possibly no Carlton Davis. I still think the Bucs win by at least a touchdown. I'm going to go with a bold prediction. Bucs get 5+ sacks in this game, and Bucs offense scores 30+. Because this Colts defense isn't very good. They're not a group I'm afraid of. They're not a group I'm worried about. And I think even with the injuries on defense, I'm not that concerned about the Colts offense. You match up with them in the trenches. Their wide receivers are good, not great. I honestly see no reason the Bucs shouldn't win this game fairly comfortably. Final score prediction, I'm going Bucs 31, Colts 23. This is game one. Game one of their playoff push. The next 4 games, you see Colts, you see Panthers, you see the Falcons. These are all winnable games. Really, the Buccaneers should win their next 4. And then I think they play either the Packers or the Jaguars. And those 2 games are a little bit more of a pick'em at Green Bay versus the Jaguars. But these next 4, these are games the Bucs can and should win. This is their season. This next month. You go 4-0, you're probably leading the division. You're probably a playoff team. You go 2-2, your season's probably over. Honestly, for a 4-6 team, I feel strangely confident. For a coach who has given me a lot of reason to not feel confident, I still feel strangely confident because the talent's there. We saw what they did against the Titans. You just man up, you play your game, and let the other team beat you. I think you can do that to Colts. I think you can do that to the Panthers. I think you can do that to the Falcons, the Saints. I think this whole stretch of teams, you can really just play your game and let them beat you. And if they beat you, that's it. You did it your way, gave them your best shot, you lost. But I think your talent will rise to the top in those situations. More talented than the Panthers, more talented than the Colts, more talented than the Falcons. Go out, play your game. This is your stretch. This is your playoff push. Colts are the start of it. Got to win tomorrow. Must win game. Otherwise, you're talking a situation where you have to win 6 or 7 games in a row to end out the year. That's not realistic. Got to beat the teams you're supposed to beat. The Colts would fall into that category. So, we will be back next week, returning with Garrett Ballard. We'll talk more, hopefully, about a Buccaneers win. We'll preview next week's game versus the Panthers. Until then, I'm JT Olson. You can find me on Twitter at IcewaterOlson. Find my written work at bucksreport.com. And go Bucs.